Good afternoon. I appreciate everyone being here today. I'm sorry we're here to report a traffic situation here in our city. This is not the norm for our city.
Your name, please.
My name's Chief David Light, Norwalk Police, Chief of Police here. Here with me today is our Safety Service Director, Mr. Bob Petusky, the Mayor of the City of Norwalk, Rob Duncan, and here with me our Executive Officer, Captain Michael Connie, as well as Detective Sergeant Jim Fulton and Detective Sergeant Seth Fry. They're the detectives that worked on this case since early Saturday morning. What I'll do is I'll go over a timeline of a sequence of events and share that with you, and when we're done we'll take questions and hopefully do some questions and answers, and also we'll have our timeline for each of you to take with you as you leave here, and we'll go from there. First, I'd like to turn everything over to Mayor of the City of Norwalk, Mayor Rob Duncan.
As Chief said, it's a very unfortunate circumstance, but we wanted to take this opportunity just to offer our condolences to the family and friends of the deceased. I also wanted to take an opportunity to thank Chief Light and his staff, and especially Sergeant Fulton, Sergeant Fry, our detectives here, who've worked tirelessly to wrap this case up, and they'll give you more of the details. We also want to thank Mansfield PD and BCI for all of their assistance and collaboration in bringing this together. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. From the beginning, this was a very rapid, evolving situation from the time this happened. And it started out with what we refer to here at the police department as a welfare check that's called in by someone from the city to do a check on a neighbor or someone they're concerned about, and that's exactly how this started. This is a quiet little neighborhood where this took place. And so I'll go over the sequence of events for you. On Saturday, September 20th, at 10:17 in the morning, the Norwalk Police Department received a request from a concerned neighbor for a welfare check of the residence of James B. Behrens, B-E-R-E-N-S, age 57, who lives at 5 Morley Drive in Norwalk. Lives there by himself in a small house. The neighbor had not seen Mr. Behrens since the previous afternoon, since Friday afternoon, and the house was open, windows were open, the door was ajar, and one of his cars was missing, and Mr. Behrens' 2 dogs also were not at or around the residence, which was unusual. It's kind of how neighbors do here in Norwalk, look out for one another. So we also contacted Fisher Titus Medical Center to see if Mr. Behrens was possibly a patient there, and of course he was not. Mr. Behrens, again age 57, has been physically handicapped since age 17 as a result of a traffic crash. He walks either with a cane or a walker that he needs to get around with. On Saturday, again September 20th, at 14:45 hours, another subject reported a suspicious vehicle in Mr. Behrens' driveway. Sergeant Montana of the Norwalk Police Department responded and learned the vehicle at the residence was driven by a relative of Jennifer Lambert. The Lamberts reside at 11 Valley Park Drive in Norwalk, only a short distance from 5 Morley. It's actually only 2 streets to the west of the victim's house on Morley Drive. Jennifer Lambert then called the police department shortly after 2:45 and reported that her husband, Shane Lambert, was wearing a bloody t-shirt when he returned home to their residence at about 3:30 p.m. on Friday, the previous day. She said the t-shirt was covered in blood, and he also had blood on his arms and his face. Sergeant Montana collected the shirt and a statement as well from Jennifer Lambert. She also reported Shane was driving a tan car which she recognized as belonging to James Behrens, as Mr. Behrens frequently gave her and Shane rides to the store and other places. I'll kind of interject there. Mr. Behrens had befriended Mr. Lambert through NA. Mr. Behrens had attended Alcoholics Anonymous for about 15 years, and was always trying to help people. And he thought he would expand his horizons by going to NA meetings and befriending people there to try to help them through their problems, similar to what someone at AA would. So he befriended Mr. Lambert only about a month and a half ago, and he had given him frequent rides down to Mansfield, where some of the relatives lived in the Mansfield area. So at some point then we learned that Mr. Behrens was going to break that relationship between himself and Mr. Lambert, because Mr. Lambert wasn't doing anything to help himself. So that will play into things as we go on here. After collecting the evidence at 11 Valley Park Drive, Sergeant Montana and another officer then returned back to 5 Morley and conducted a protective sweep of the residence and did not observe anyone inside the residence or any signs of foul play in the house itself. They checked the house to see if he was hurt or injured or anything was going on in the house, and couldn't find any signs of a struggle, any signs of foul play, but the dogs were not there either. So we secured a perimeter of the house and placed an officer there to guard the house throughout the night until we had a better idea of what was going on. So detectives then Sunday morning obtained a search warrant for the house and the garage and the remaining car through Judge Weisenberger at Norwalk Municipal Court, and then we called BCI and I from the Attorney General's office to help us process what could be a crime scene. So they assisted and collected in processing the crime scene, but it was noted at that time that in the garage they found Mr. Behrens' walking cane and some personal papers that were located on the garage floor. I believe specifically a Social Security card,
Some business cards.
and his cane was laying there, who we knew he could not walk without. So that was a notable piece of information. A sergeant from the Mansfield Police Department called to advise they made contact with some of Shane Lambert's family at 511 Pearl Street, and they learned that Shane had been at the residence the night before and had burned some papers and documents in the backyard, and one person claimed they saw seen a body in the trunk. Later determined not to be accurate. The vehicle Shane was driving. The vehicle Shane was driving was that of Mr. Behrens. It is reported at that point that Shane had left the Pearl Street residence and possibly headed for Kentucky. During the course of the investigation, it was learned that Shane Lambert had broken into an Orange Street market in Mansfield, Ohio. And I believe that's on the Mansfield News website. There's an actual video footage of him breaking in to that business. An undetermined amount of cigarettes were stolen and other items, but the video surveillance showed Shane Lambert exiting Mr. Behrens' vehicle at the scene. So he still had Mr. Behrens' vehicle at that point in time. And Detective Sergeant Fulton Fry was able to identify for Mansfield that suspect was in fact Shane Lambert, who had committed that breaking and entering. Detective Sergeant Fulton and Detective Sergeant Fry went to Mansfield and met with officers from the Mansfield Police Department at 511 Pearl Street. They interviewed several of the relatives of Shane Lambert. A William Billy Lambert told them that Shane had been at his residence yesterday and left early this morning. They said Shane had been smoking crack cocaine and was very nervous. After Shane left the residence, Shane's son, Ty, forthwith told William his dad did something he was probably going to spend the rest of his life in prison for. William said Ty told him he saw a body in the trunk, but again, this was later determined not to be accurate, of the car Shane was driving, but he did see blood in the passenger seat of that vehicle, which was Mr. Behrens' vehicle. William also reported Shane was burning a wallet and other personal items which belonged to the man whose body he thought was in the trunk. But William had not actually seen this body. We called BCI and I again to help us at that location, and they processed the evidence from the fire pit behind 511 Pearl Street for evidence. What they recovered was a pair of men's wire rim glasses that appeared to be the same type and style worn by James Behrens in his driver's license photo. There were also business cards that have Norwalk on them that were difficult to read. We believe that to be Mr. Behrens' personal property. On the morning of Sunday, September 21st, Mr. Barron's vehicle was located by the Mansfield Police Department. The vehicle was towed to the Mansfield Police Department garage and secured there where it remains right now. The vehicle will be processed for physical evidence by BCI&I, but the Mansfield officers reported that the front passenger seat of the vehicle was soaked with blood, and there was blood spatter inside the vehicle, indicating the crime took place in Mr. Barron's vehicle. The detectives continued to receive information from sources and some of Shane Lambert's concerned family members. One source advised Mr. Barron's body was dumped somewhere near the bike trails to the west of Northwest Street, which is in the same neighborhood where they both live. It's close to Mr. Barron's house and also close to Lambert's home on Valley Park Drive. Throughout Sunday afternoon and evening, the officers searched the entire area with the search of 4 cadaver dogs, the assistance of 4 cadaver dogs. Negative results, we didn't turn up anything into the night till after it got dark. Now, the night shift began to expand our search. The officers working the road patrol began to expand our search to the immediate area and any place where someone could have gotten away and to leave the body. The reason this was done, we felt that through the information from Mr. Lambert's wife, he left the house Friday afternoon, went 2 blocks to the east of there to Mr. Barron's place, and was back home all in about 45 minutes. So he had rode a bicycle over to Mr. Barron's house. We believe he committed the crime in the garage of Mr. Barron's house, and then had him in the car, went about a quarter mile, half a mile to the north, where he disposed of the body, and then went back to his house to change that bloody shirt that I mentioned earlier, then head south to Mansfield. So this morning at 3:52 a.m. this morning, Mansfield Police had called and reported that Shane Lambert was involved in an officer-involved shooting and was dead. The details surrounding the death of Mr. Lambert are unknown at this time. That still is under investigation down in Mansfield. On September 22nd then, just a short time later, 4:17 a.m. this morning, Captain Hipp located the body of James Barron's off of Washington Road. If you go west on Washington Road like you're headed toward Monroeville, just after you break over the hill, just outside the city limits, there's a little pathway that leads up into a wooded area on top of a hill and a field up there. It's just a path leading up to that field. At that point, Captain Hipp was just checking every available lane he could find, as well as the other officers, and that's where they found Mr. Barron's body. Again, Mr. Barron's 2 dogs were located there at the scene, and they're alive, and they were actually guarding the body. The scene again was immediately secured, and BCI&I was called. They showed up and processed the entire crime scene. The Huron County Dogs Warden's office arrived and were able to take custody of one of the 2 dogs. And Mr. Barron's body at this time was transported to Lucas County Coroner's office, and an autopsy will be performed later this afternoon or tomorrow morning to determine the actual cause of death. Detective Sergeant Fulton and Detective Sergeant Fry are continuing their already thorough investigation. At this time, they're in the process of obtaining yet another search warrant for a residence in Mansfield to believe what may be related to the murder of James Barron. And they just literally came in the front door while we were walking in here. Again, this is a tragedy. It's not the type of thing we're used to here in Norwalk. I believe it's been 1990 since we had anything like this happen in this town. So normally it's not the type of thing we investigate here. It's quite a shock to the community and to the family of Mr. Barron's. At this time, we'll entertain any questions. Yes, ma'am?
Can you talk more about the motive and the relationship between this bill that led to this?
The relationship people. Like I said, he was physically handicapped, and he went to an NA meeting to try to help people there, and this is where he befriended Shane Lambert and was actually trying to help him. He had given Shane and his wife rides to the grocery stores and so forth, and had taken Shane to Mansfield, Ohio several times to visit relatives down there. But at some point, he told, Mr. Behrens told a real close friend of his who's here today, and we'll let you talk to him in a few minutes, has agreed to talk to you all, that he was going to break his ties with Mr. Lambert because he wasn't going along with the program. He wasn't doing anything to help himself. So out of speculation, we feel that Lambert rode his bicycle over there to force Mr. Behrens to give him a ride somewhere again, and I can only speculate that he wasn't willing to go along with the program, and we're thinking that's probably what caused the violence, because we have every reason to believe that he was killed in the garage, in his car, inside his car.
It's my understanding he was stabbed to death. Can you confirm that?
We, at this point, can't say what the cause of death is. We're going to be going to the autopsy tomorrow. We'll have more information after that.
It sounds like there's quite a few details here, but Mr. Behrens befriended a career criminal who ended up killing him in his car and then dumping the body in Mansfield.
The point of the body right here in Norwalk, about a half a mile from his home.
Why was he ever in Mansfield? He was shot and killed in Mansfield?
No, Mr. Behrens was not.
No.
Mr. Lambert was.
Lambert was shot and killed in Mansfield.
Yes, he went back there where he has. I'm not sure if it's near the relatives or not, but
it's not too far from that location. There is a known drug area.
In Mansfield?
It's a known drug area. He's got relatives there. He's involved in smoking crack cocaine and hiding out from the police. He had committed probably at least 3 more crimes, breaking and entries to markets and gas stations.
Was he shot 11 times?
I don't have any information on that.
Did he confront police with a gun?
that we haven't heard yet. They got the call, or they called us early this morning, in the middle of the night here, and let us know that there had been a confrontation with him. And initially, when they called us, they called to see if they wanted to come down and interview him and the family, because they thought they knew where he was at. And then before they could even get dressed, then the call came back again that there had been a confrontation and he was dead.
It sounds like his family already knew that he had done something bad, something heinous, and they were helping police.
They were cooperating with us. We had gone down there, and that's where we got the information that some of the belongings were burned in that fire at 511 Pearl Street. And BCI processed that and obtained some evidence for us. We believe those are his eyeglasses that were recovered from the fire pit.
And if I understand you correctly, his son said something to the effect of, my father's done something that he'll spend the rest of his life in jail for, and his wife or his girlfriend said he had all sorts of blood on his person and his clothes.
Yes, he had the blood on his person just a short time after he went to Mr. Barron's house and before he headed to Mansfield. Yeah.
511 Pearl Street, is that where Lambert lived?
His relatives lived there. He was living here in Norwalk at 11 Valley Park.
Oh, where's 511 Pearl Street?
That's in Mansfield. That's where he had relatives that were living. His uncle, I believe, is a person who has that house.
I mean, where did Lambert live that he could ride his bike to?
11 Valley Park.
I'm sorry?
11 Valley Park.
It's on the west side of town. If you go out West Main Street, you'll see Valley Park to your right.
How long of a bike ride is that from Morley?
Oh,
Less than 5 minutes.
Oh.
yeah, yeah. And the bicycle he rode there was recovered at Mr. Barron's house, so he rode it over. It's just a short 2 small city blocks to get across there.
And they met at AA, but then Mr. Barron's reached out to him through NA?
Every indication is that Mr. Shane Lambert was not at AA, but was going to NA, and that he reached out to him in NA, even though no indication that Mr. Barron's ever used drugs. He went there to try to expand his horizons to help people.
Because he had been through AA himself.
Yes, 15 years of AA, yes.
Can you talk any more about Mr. Barron's, what was like? I mean, you gave that information, but what he's like, person, family?
He lived there alone in his house, and his lady he lived with had passed away just a couple of years ago, so he was just alone with his dogs. He's the type of person who just blended into the community, no criminal record whatsoever that we can find. Just the type of guy you see at the grocery store every day, and because of his the accident he was in when he was a teenager, then he was handicapped to the point where he had to use a cane or a walker to get around on, so he was just making the best of his time by trying to reach out and help other people.
Chief, Mansfield Police, this shooting occurred at 225 Herman Avenue, and the house behind it is 226 Claremont Avenue, and the police also had that taped off, and they had a car there, and I think there were officers inside searching it. Is that a relative's home? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. It would be a sister, we believe, and her daughter, and a boyfriend. They're right adjacent to each other. It's a rather large crime scene that they're still processing there, but was in one house, fled and went to another house, it sounds like, and I don't have all the details, so I'd rather not speculate on exactly what happened. They're still in the process of processing that whole
The
crime
Mansfield
scene.
Police Chief was careful, shall we say, highly careful about what he would say, and
Yeah, they haven't shared anything with us along that lines, other than, like I said earlier, when they called to have us, that they thought they located them to come out and interview, and then within just a very short time later, the shooting had occurred. So,
well, what was I going to say? The chief, the Mansfield Police Chief is the one who told me off camera that it was his understanding Mr. Behrens was stabbed to death. That's where I got that.
oh,
Um,
when Captain Hipp found Mr. Barron's body, he backed off. I was talking to him on the phone as he approached the body, and to determine that it was in fact Mr. Barron's and that he was dead. And then he backed off and secured everything, so we didn't ourselves examine the body. And the BCI come and processed the scene. The coroner, Huron County Coroner, Dr. Harwood, showed up, examined the body briefly, and then made the determination to have it transported up to Toledo to the coroner's office up there for an autopsy. So we don't have any of the details other than the fact that it was him and that he's deceased. It was noted that there was little to no blood at the place where the body was found, which would indicate that the majority of the blood found in the passenger seat of the car and in the interior of the car was no doubt where the crime took place.
okay, well, I did say in the story that I did with the Mansfield Police Chief, multiple stab wounds. I better change that back off on it if that's not confirmed.
No, we haven't been able to confirm that at all.
And I also said that this home at 226 Claremont was Lambert's home, because that was my understanding, but it's relatives.
Relatives, yeah.
All right.
Were you guys familiar with Lambert in town? Does he have a mugshot locally?
I'm sure.
He was recently incarcerated in the Huron County Jail for, I believe it was a theft offense. He just recently was released, probably within the last 3 weeks.
Do you know much about his criminal history? Because he's a familiar name in Mansfield.
I describe him as a career criminal.
What kinds of offenses are we generally talking about?
Mostly thefts, breaking and entries, burglaries, and I think there were a couple assaults in there.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question?
Sir?
I understand the timeline. On Friday afternoon was when Mr. Lambert was seen by his wife with the bloody T-shirt, et cetera, and she called you on Friday afternoon?
No, it was Saturday before she called us.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Matter of fact, it was about the same time the neighbors were calling to say something's not right here. His windows are up, the door's ajar, we can't find the dogs. So that's when we went down there. About the same time then, they get the call from his wife.
When would you say that you put together both Mr. Barron's disappearance and the fact that Mr. Lambert had been seen covered in blood? Those two things are related.
Well, she had also mentioned that he knew Mr. Behrens, and then everything started coming together at about the same time when Mansfield had posted on their website photographs and the video of Shane Lambert breaking into that convenience store on Orange Street, and they recognized him right away as being someone living here, so that's when we started communicating with Mansfield. And then the car involved, we were looking for Mr. Barron's car, and it turns out it had the same description, so it didn't take long to put that one together, that he had taken his car down there. But we still, at the time, it was kind of strange because we didn't know the exact relationship between those two and how they were associated. So we really didn't know if they were just together somewhere, spending time together, if he'd give him a ride down and back. We just couldn't figure out, the real association between them, and it just kind of we kept getting more and more information from the family, and then, of course, after the tragedy, some friends and so forth that gave us the details. Yeah.
Just a couple of questions. I don't live too far from there. I noticed a couple of extra cruisers out last night. Were you looking for perhaps that car to return to the area?
Once we had the car in custody yesterday down there, and that was secured at Mansfield, but the fact that he was still on the run and that his wife lived 2 streets over still, we were concerned that he might return to the area. And again, that's a quiet, peaceful part of town. We usually don't have anything like this happen. We were concerned that he might show back up in Norwalk, because if he was in fact smoking the crack cocaine that he was, it's mood swings all over the place, and we didn't know what to expect from him.
When the autopsy results are back, will this case be closed, or will we wait for additional information from Mansfield PD?
It should be closed once it comes back, unless something new surfaces. Right now, they'll go back to Mansfield with another search warrant to secure the clothes that they believe is at another residence, and just to shore things up a little bit. We have no reason to believe that anyone else was involved with this other than Shane Lambert.
There was another car, like a Hyundai Elantra, that's at the crime scene there, or at the house in Morley now. Is that car involved in any way, or that just isn't?
That's his. He owns that car.
Okay.
But he used that car when he drove around town and took the dogs with him. He put them in that car.
Okay.
But he usually didn't put the dogs in the car that was in the garage. He usually kept the dogs out of that car for the dog whatnot. So that was another flag that went up, because we knew that if the dogs were gone, the car is gone. It's just unusual for him. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming down here. I'm sorry it's for such a tragedy we have to speak like this.